everybody. I'm glad to see everybody here. I'm a member of the Interfaith Community for the Earth, so I'm the one that's going to introduce Karrah. Plus, I'm also her mother-in-law, which is kind of a bonus. And I want to thank all the sponsors that are sponsoring this event. One is the Interfaith Community for the Earth, the Citizens Climate Lobby Stevens Point Chapter, Frank Memorial Presbyterian Green Team, Central River Farmshed, Aldo, Leopold Audubon Society, North Central Conservancy Trust, League of Women Voters of the Stevens Point area, 350stevenspoint.org, Students for Sustainability, Clean Green Action in Wisconsin Rapids, Farmers of the Mill Street Watershed, and the Wisconsin Farmers Union. So, many of us here, at least in the interfaith group, have a perspective that conservation and sustainable development is really important. And so I just wanted to share from the Baha'i perspective from a statement of the Baha'i international community. It says, for Baha'is, Baha'u'llah's promise that civilization will exist on this planet for a minimum of 5,000 centuries makes it unconscionable to ignore the long-term impact of decisions made today. The world community must therefore learn to make use of the Earth's natural resources, renewable and non-renewable, in a manner that ensures sustainability into the distant reaches of time. So, I'd like to introduce you to Karrah Kwasnik. She's a digital context manager for the USDA Northeast Climate Hub. Her job is to make complex information more approachable through design and visual storytelling mediums. Today she will give us an overview of the USDA Climate Hubs, highlight key messages from the 4th National Climate Assessment specific to the Midwest, and delve into projects she has been a part of to inform and inspire others. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of New Hampshire in business marketing. As of late, Karrah helped spearhead the virtual climate adaptation demonstration project, As If You Were There, where she championed multiple virtual tours from camera to launch. Please welcome Karrah Kwasnik.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. As Mary mentioned, my name is Karrah Kwasnik, and I work for the USDA Northeast Climate Hubs. What are the climate hubs? I'm going to get to that in a second because I've heard that question a lot as of late. But before I start, I just want to preface my talk that I'm not a scientist at all. Far from it, but I work with a lot of them. So in my role as a digital content manager, I mainly work in design and production. And in terms of helping to synthesize research and knowledge into usable products for people on the ground. And by people on the ground, I mean our extension agents, our service providers, our farmers, and our forest land managers. So after I tell you about what the USDA Climate Hubs are, I'm going to do my best to delve into the National Climate Assessment that came out in November 2018, and then I'll close with some of the projects that I've been directly involved with for the Northeast Climate Hub. So finally, what are the Climate Hubs? The USDA Climate Hubs are an initiative created a little over 5 years ago through the previous administration's USDA Secretary of Agriculture, and they've been continued on through the current Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, with the direct vision to maintain robust and healthy agricultural production and natural resources under our increasing climate variability and climate change. And so to achieve this, the Climate Hubs were created as a unique collaboration across USDA agencies. The hubs have primarily been led so far by USDA's Agricultural Research Service and the Forest Service, with active involvement and contributions from Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Farm Service Agency, the Risk Management Agency, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and with many other federal and state agencies, land-grant universities, nonprofits, and private organizations alike. Structurally, let's see if I can use this clicker. Structurally, we have 10 regional climate hubs, 7 being region-specific. You can kind of see they're outlined here. So here's the Midwest Hub region, and then over here is the region I work in, the Northeast, that stretches from Maine down to West Virginia. So 7 of these hubs are region-specific, and then we have kind of 3 special hubs. 2, the Caribbean Climate Hub and the California Climate Hub, focus on agriculture and forestry specific kind of to those niche regions. And then we also have a Northern Forest Climate Hub, which is headquartered up in Houghton, Michigan. So they cover the regions geographically of both the Midwest and the Northeast, but they have a specialty in forestry. So today we're going to just be focusing on things happening in the Midwest and projects happening in the Northeast. Together, our mission is to develop and deliver science-based, region-specific information and technologies to agriculture and natural resource managers so that they can confidently make climate-informed decisions specific to their operations and land. And under this mission, we have 3 main objectives: stakeholder outreach and education, tool development and technology exchange, and information synthesis and scientific research. In terms of outreach and education, for us this means engaging with farmers, forest landowners, and service providers, as well as researchers and students of all levels, in order to share the latest understanding of climate science and the effects of climate change on our working lands. So this not only includes attending and helping to host workshops, event booths, field days, and webinars, but it also includes things like creating and piloting educational curriculums, climate adaptation workbooks, supporting a virtual lab with graduate students who are specializing on researching climate adaptation, as well as producing virtual tours of climate adapted farms and forests, which is a project that I'll be talking about later tonight. In terms of our tools and technology goal, the aim is to improve access to actual usable regional data and climate change projections and forecasts in order to support risk management and climate adaptation planning. A specific project example of this is the RMA AgRisk Viewer. It's a website actually that can be used to look at geographical and historical crop loss information from USDA's Risk Management Agency. And this really allows a person to delve into county level information about what climate impacts are really affecting your county and kind of what crops are most vulnerable to those climate impacts. We're also currently in the process of adding in data, crop loss data from FSA, the Farm Service Agency, into this website as well. And our last objective, research and science synthesis, means we support a range of research projects, and we also help create products from that scientific research that drive risk management and drive climate change response on farms and forests. The Climate Hubs have also produced periodic assessments of the risk and vulnerability to agriculture and forestry across each of our regions. And they've also been charged with writing and contributing to our country's national climate assessment. And just to illustrate this kind of contribution we've done thus far, just looking at the most recent National Climate Assessment's Midwest chapter, the lead federal author, as well as 2 other contributing authors, were from the USDA Climate Hubs. For those unfamiliar, the The National Climate Assessment summarizes the impact of climate change on the United States now and into the future. It's prepared every 4 years by the United States Global Change Research Program. And this report is created from a team of more than 300 experts, guided by a 60-member federal advisory committee. It's extensively reviewed, both through public and experts alike, including federal agencies and a panel from the National Academy of the Sciences. The most recent National Climate Assessment that we'll be talking about today was completed in November 2018. So looking at our country as a whole, annual average temperatures across North America are projected to increase with proportionally greater changes in our higher latitudes, aka us in the Midwest and the Northeast especially. This figure here compares the observed changes from 1986 to 2016, which is on the very top, right here. So this is what's already happened. With projected differences in annual average temperatures for mid-century, which mid-century is 2036 to 2065, and end of century, which is 2070 to 2099, relative to near present. So that time range of near present is data from 1986 to 2015.
Excuse me, would you be able to talk closer into the microphone? You're a little hard to hear.
Sorry,
Did you turn?
it's on. I think they just, is that a little better or no?
I think if you put it up on your collar, good. It seems a little in your face, but.
I think it might be a little, is that better? I'm not,
Really, you gotta really talk me into it anyway.
should I just do this? I don't really know if it's making it
No,
better.
it's not, I don't think it's working. Is it on here? There's a red light on the top of that box that should be on.
I'm not seeing the light.
It worked earlier, so.
Testing?
Oh! Much better.
Okay, let's try this again.
Okay, start over.
We missed all of
Well, this is the more important stuff. This is the actual data. So, let's see. I already kind of gave you an overview of the figure, but just to kind of better describe this. On the left, we have a lower climate change scenario versus a higher climate change scenario. And at the bottom of this chart, this is the change in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. So it ranges from -1. So in places, I mean, right now in terms of observed, there are some places in the U.S. that are actually having a lower than average annual temperature. And then it ranges up to 8 degrees change in temperature. If we look at our low scenarios, we're probably looking at 4 to 5 degree change for mid-century into late century at the very kind of safe climate change scenario for our area. Whereas when we get into higher climate change model scenarios, you can see by end of century in the Midwest, Northeast, Northern Plains, we're really could very likely be looking at an 8 degree average annual temperature change. So that's a really big deal and really scary. So I'll move on. Kind of taking this, what we just looked at, and bringing it home into kind of what it means for the Midwest and some crops. This table is from the National Climate Assessment. It's looking at the Midwest in terms of the modeled historical and projected average annual 5-day maximum temperatures. And this illustrates the temperature increases projected for the middle of this century across the Midwest under both high and low climate change scenarios. So just kind of hold on to these numbers that you see on this chart and just note that we're looking at northern Minnesota and southern Missouri just to kind of represent our, for at least the Midwest region, the northern and southern kind of points. So now to head into the biggest crops from the Midwest, corn and soybeans. This table shows the temperatures at which corn and soybeans reach optimum growth and reproduction, as well as the temperatures at which growth and reproduction fail. So by mid-century, the average annual 5-day maximum temperature in southern Missouri under the low climate change scenario is likely to be about 102 degrees. So soybeans will not be faring well down there. Under the high climate change scenario, corn will likely face reproduction failure throughout the region. And temperature isn't the only climate change impact to be concerned with here. In general, heavy precipitation is becoming more intense and more frequent across most of the United States, particularly in the Northeast and Midwest. And these trends are projected to continue into the future under both our low and high climate change scenarios. This map shows the observed and projected change in the amount of precipitation falling, and this is the important part, precipitation falling in the heaviest 1% of our rain events. So this is our really intense downpours. This is the precipitation, the rain change of what we have. Let's see. This is already observed. This is the change we already know of. And then this is our low climate change scenario and our high. This very dark blue here means there's a 40% change. Yellow is no change. So you can already see it kind of in terms of what we've already experienced. This map is showing data from 19. So I think this might be turned off again. I'm sorry, what? Okay, I'll just keep an eye on this.
There it is.
So you have to stop moving.
We'll see about that. So what we've already observed, the graph on the top left, 1901 to 2016, and then there's another graph that's just pulling another data set that's showing the changes from 1958 to 2016. So they're kind of similar, but basically you can see in the regions that have dark blue are pretty much Midwest and the Northeast. So we already know what some of this change looks like, and I'm sure all of you have seen, we've experienced flooding recently and a lot of rain, and we're experiencing that in the Northeast as well, so you're not alone. And you might be thinking, well, when are we going to get all this rain? Well, in this series of maps, we can see that the observed and projected precipitation changes will vary both by region and season. So in the very top graph, we're seeing the observed changes in seasonal rain. Historically, I'm being turned off again. So historically, the Great Plains and the northeastern United States have experienced increased rain, while our Southwest has experienced a decrease for the period of 1986 to 2015, relative to the deep range of 1901 to 1960. And so in the future, under the high climate change scenario, the northern United States, including Alaska, is projected to receive more rain and more rain. And more rain, especially in our winters and our springs. And for anyone that is involved with gardening or agriculture, you probably know this is not good news. So how can we build climate resilience for stronger farms and stronger forest systems that work both? Should I just try and talk louder because this keeps turning?
If that's the best you can do, yeah.
Faces when you talk.
Okay. So how can we build stronger forest and ag systems that work for both our rural economies and the environment? One agricultural adaptation example posed by the National Climate Assessment is integrating strips of native prairie vegetation into row crops. And this has been shown to reduce sediment and nutrient loss from fields, as well as improve biodiversity and the delivery of ecosystem services. Other agricultural adaptation practices that can help keep nutrients in the soils and build soil health, increase water holding capacities, and drought conditions, and drainage abilities, and fields and wet conditions, includes practices like no-till, cover cropping, and planting green. And a lot of these practices are not new to farmers. In addition, the restoration of natural systems, especially of wetland systems, can help protect people and nature from climate change impacts. So, as many of you probably already know, Midwest ecosystems support a diverse array of native species and provide people with essential services such as water purification, flood control, crop pollination, and even recreational opportunities. Yet these ecosystem services are typically most at risk when climate stressors like temperature increases interact with land use change, habitat loss, pollution, nutrient inputs, and non-native invasive species. Pictured here is the Blase Tract Restoration Project of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge in Ohio. This project restored 100 acres of former Lake Erie coastal wetlands that were previously in row crop production. In addition to providing habitat for wildlife and fish, these wetlands help reduce climate change impacts by storing water from high water events and by filtering nutrients and sediments out of water pumped from an adjacent farm ditch. Lastly, increasing our forest diversity and selecting for tree species adapted to a range of projected conditions is another adaptation to consider. Midwest forests provide numerous economic and ecological benefits. However, the changing climate coupled with existing stressors, such as invasive species and pests, will increase tree mortality and reduce forest productivity. The photo here on the right shows Menominee Tribal Enterprises staff creating opportunity from adversity by replanting a forest opening caused by oak wilt disease with a diverse array of trees and understory plants and plant species that are expected to fare better under our future climate conditions. So what tree species will fare better under changing climate conditions here in Wisconsin? The Tree Atlas is a tool that uses climate change scenarios and current distribution information to project future habitat suitability for individual tree species. This slide shows the most common tree species in the Wisconsin area, organized into general categories of future expectations. So for you, as you can kind of see here, on the left most column, we have tree species that are most likely to decrease. Some of these tree species include our balsam firs, black ash, red pine, paper birch. In the middle, we have tree species that kind of got mixed results from this tool. So either they could face decline in some areas, or they could do really well in other areas of Wisconsin. Some of these trees include our black cherry, eastern hemlock, sugar maples, white oak, red pine. And then on the very far right, we have a list of tree species that are projected to do very well under climate change scenarios in Wisconsin. And this includes, American elm, black oak, walnut, silver maple, sassafras, just for an example. And then I can go back to the slide later, but I think you might really find these PDF links at the bottom really interesting. They outline more of this in detail. And it divides it into northern Wisconsin and southern Wisconsin tree species. But just as a note here, just remember that these are models and they're tools. So they're not perfect, and these models don't necessarily account for some factors that could be modified by climate change for things like droughts, wildfire activity, and invasive species. So now, jumping out of the Midwest, we're going to head to the Northeast. I'm now going to introduce you to some of the people that have been addressing climate change on the ground through projects that I've helped produce for the Northeast Climate Hub. The first couple of projects I'll be talking about come from a larger project done in partnership with the University of Delaware, as well as other USDA land grant collaborators. And this project is coined As If You Were There, because it's a network of virtual demonstration sites for climate adaptation on our existing farms and forests throughout the Northeast. Through interactive 360 photography, videos, and educational storytelling, this project bridges viewers directly into climate adaptation and planning. So through these virtual field tours, visitors can see how others are dealing with increasing rainfall, extended growing seasons, invasive pests, and other weather and climate-related risks simply from their own computer, tablet, or smartphone. This image is from a virtual tour, still in production actually, but there's a really interesting story behind it. And so this tour is looking at milkweed as an alternative fiber crop, working with the University of Vermont Extension, Borderview Farm, which is located, as its name indicates, at the very tip of Vermont, just on the US-Canada border. And it has set up field trials for milkweed, milkweed as an actual crop, not just a kind of invasive or pest plant. And it's completed their first harvest this past fall. And so you're probably all wondering why milkweed, because most farmers try to get rid of milkweed. This crop actually holds a lot of market potential and has a lot of environmental benefits, as some of you probably already know this. So environmentally, milkweed is the only food for the monarch butterfly, which is a very important pollinator throughout the U.S. It also acts more like a perennial crop, in that you actually only harvest it about every 3 to 4 years. So that allows this crop to really establish really deep root systems. And when you think about the more intense and frequent rain events that we are experiencing in both the Northeast and the Midwest, this plant really helps keep soils covered, and it helps keep the plant healthy in drought conditions and wet conditions because of the good root systems established. And from the market perspective, the silk of the milkweed has really high insulation, absorption, and flotation qualities. It's actually really soft. You wouldn't think it, but once they process it and you're able to kind of feel the material that they make from this milkweed, it's really surprising. Insulation-wise, some companies are already currently experimenting with this as a down alternative. It's also really absorbent, so it can actually be used to clean up oil spills, wrung out and reused. And actually, milkweed isn't a new crop. It was harvested by farmers in the Northeast and Midwest during World War II to be used in life vests for soldiers. And before I jump into this next project, which takes place in Burlington, Vermont, I just want to, as an aside, let you know that these projects are published and they are online, so you can go visit them and explore them. And so when you go and do that, you're going to see these little pop-ups on your screen, on your smartphone, tablet, computer. And when you click on them, they expand to give you more information, whether that be a video interview with the farmer or the researcher, or it gives you information and other media resources to explore. So this 360 is working with the University of Vermont Extension as well, and they're doing research on dairy farms, on working dairy farms in the state, examining how management practices can affect water quality, economics, and greenhouse gas emissions. For a little background though, in Vermont's Winooski floodplain, agriculture is a common land use for these well-drained and productive soils. However, intense rain and flooding events are increasing throughout the Northeast, just as they are in the Midwest. So if not managed well, this trend will worsen nutrient loss, runoff, and erosion from farm fields. And in the Winooski area, agriculture is already a primary contributor of phosphorus to Lake Champlain. So more nutrient loss and more erosion will lead to poorer water quality. To address this issue, scientists are working with farmers to assess how alternative farming practices on dairy farms compare to conventional systems. These scientists are measuring runoff, they're measuring leaching, and they're measuring greenhouse gas emissions across small watersheds on these working farms. They're also tracking how much it costs the farms to use these practices, and if there's any positive or negative effects on crop yields. So the overall goal of this research is to find ways to help make our farms in the Northeast more economically, environmentally resilient to climate change. This next 360 takes place in the Mid-Atlantic, Delaware. And in the Mid-Atlantic region, high heat and droughts are likely to become more common as the climate changes. Irrigation is widely used to protect crop yields during these extreme events. For this next virtual tour, we're traveling actually down to University of Delaware's Warrington Irrigation Research Farm. And here researchers are looking at how to improve irrigation methods in order to boost crop yields and manage soil and water resources better. And as any farmer or gardener here knows, water is one of the most critical needs for any crop. So by improving water management, farmers can be sure that their crops receive adequate water throughout the growing season. And having a more efficient irrigation system not only helps save money and energy and protects crops, it also reduces carbon dioxide emissions. And it also creates a better environment. So this next project actually isn't a virtual tour, but rather more of an ongoing partnership with the farm. In this picture, on the left is William Della Camara, who is the farm manager for Cesarelli Farms. And on the right is actually my boss, Dave Hollinger, who's the director of the USDA Northeast Climate Hub. In late January 2017, we installed an on-farm weather station at Cesarelli Farms, which is about 120-acre diversified vegetable farm in Northbridge, Connecticut. In exchange for doing this, farm owner Nelson Cesarelli and the farm manager, Will, would share how they use this data on the weather station on their farm, along with sharing any stories or information about the weather and climate challenges they face and how they overcome those in growing seasons. And so just for an overview, some of the big climate impacts that this farm is dealing with are heavy rains that have caused soil erosion, drought, and shifting growing seasons. So years prior to our visit in January 2017, intense rain events eroded farm fields and washed away newly tilled crop soils. In response, Nelson actively looked for ways to adapt his sloping fields to these more frequent and intense rain events. In working with Extension, Nelson adopted a practice known as deep zone tillage. This tillage practice disturbs only a very narrow strip of soil, allowing for enough to plant and inject fertilizer. So disturbing the soils less has meant less erosion and less runoff for their farm. Nelson's agricultural stewardship are what made his farm stand out to the Climate Hubs as a place to host this weather station and start this partnership. And as Nelson put it, a few miles really matters a lot when you're monitoring crops. Sadly though, we only had the opportunity to work with Nelson for about a year before he passed in January 2018 after his battle with cancer. But his legacy and passion for farming continues on through his business partner and longtime friend, Will. As you can imagine, Will has been busier than ever in taking up the responsibilities Nelson once had on the farm. So the weather station has really been a critical tool for some of the farm's management practices. It's used to help protect strawberries in spring from late frost, as temperature alerts can be set up to tell them when to turn on irrigation for frost protection. It has also complemented the farm's integrated pest management strategies about when to look for or spray for certain pests and diseases based on humidity and leaf wetness conditions. Last summer, for instance, Will took on a really big project on the farm, and to address increasing periods of drought and on-farm water availability, Will installed a subsurface drip irrigation system, commonly the acronym is SDI. So this SDI system is a low-pressure, high-efficiency watering system which uses drip tube lines, but they're buried about 10 to 12 inches down. And by its very nature of being deep below ground, there's no surface water evaporation taking place, and so water and nutrients can really be more targeted to actual root zones of crops. And more targeted water and nutrients to root zones means higher crop yields on the farm. And this system also tends to reduce weed populations, since most weed seeds tend to germinate closer to the soil's surface. Altogether, a properly installed and maintained SDI system can greatly improve crop yields, conserve water, and reduce labor and herbicide costs due to lower weed populations. Like many other longtime farmers, Will also feels that the seasons have shifted. And the latest climate models indicate that these changes are likely to continue. Earlier springs, extended growing seasons, and lengthier falls can offer opportunity for greater agricultural yields in the Northeast, especially when you think of New England, who already has a really short growing season. However, the agricultural benefits of an extended growing season may not easily align with a farm's labor force, especially if it's on a contract basis. Farms with hired labor may soon need to reevaluate their labor costs and needs against the profit potential from continued harvest, with lengthier, warmer falls becoming the new normal. With this in mind, Will decided last year to lay out some of the plots of field tomatoes and peppers without the use of plastic mulch, so that if the growing season extended later than normal into late October like it did last year, the farm would be able to benefit from the continued harvest while minimizing labor needs post-harvest for these fields. So overall, there are many actions farmers can take to lessen the impacts or even take advantage of climate trends. As Cesarelli Farms has shown us, some actions include the farm's use of deep zone tillage to combat soil erosion from heavy rains, the installation of an SDI system for more efficient, targeted water to crops, adjusting planting practices in anticipation of lengthier growing seasons, and making informed decisions based on their own on-farm weather station data. This next project is a case study on the climate adaptations happening on a small-scale organic dairy in Charleston, Maine. Clovercrest Farm is owned and operated by Steve Morrison and Sonia Pike Merlin. They milk 95 Jersey cattle on 250 acres. 125 of these acres are pasture, and the other half are wooded. The farm rents about 350 acres of cropland in the surrounding area to grow winter forage for the cattle. The main climate change impacts that this farm is experiencing are heavy rains, more rain and less snow in the winters, and drought. So changing precipitation patterns reported in Maine over the last decade show a doubling of days with more than 2 inches of rain. At Clovercrest Farm, these heavy rains have led to washed out roadways and eroded cowlands. It has limited their ability to use equipment on fields during these wet periods, and this hinders important farm tasks. According to Steve, the extreme heavy rainfall combined with their aging farm infrastructure has had a negative effect on milk production and herd health. Precipitation in the Northeast has also increased by 8% since 1991, relative to the 1901 to 1960 time period. Simultaneously, the number of days with temperature below 32 degrees Fahrenheit has decreased during winter months. So this increases the likelihood that the precipitation that falls in this time is rain or freezing rain and not snow. Steve and Sonia have observed that these freezing and thawing cycles, in combination with winter rains, make the ground icier and harder for the herd to move on when coming and going from pasture to barn. Drought has also had a large impact on dairy farms in general, an even greater impact on dairy farms that rely on pasture. Decreased rainfall reduces grass growth, which means that cows will require more acres in the summer to meet their forage needs. This in turn then reduces the amount of land available for making hay, which can lead to a shortage of stored feed available during the winter and spring. For example, in In 2016, the Northeast experienced a pretty extreme drought, and this meant that Steve and Sonia were not able to sell any of their feed to their neighbors like they normally do. Despite these climate setbacks, Steve and Sonia are proactive and strategic. As a result of the increasing rainfall, Steve has created several poured concrete areas called heavy use areas, or the acronym of the HUA, where cows spend time during the day when they cannot be on pasture. These areas are designed to help keep cows elevated and out of the mud during wet periods. And they want to do this because when cows are exposed to mud, this makes it harder for milking to keep their udders clean, and there's also an increased risk of health issues that cows can experience as a result to frequent exposure to mud. Another adaptation Steve and Sonia have made to increase labor efficiency, decrease farm costs, and enhance their general quality of life with their family was actually switched to once-a-day milking in 2016. They did experience an anticipated 20% drop in milk production, but they recovered back up to 90% of initial volume within 12 months. While once-a-day milking reduces milk production per cow, Steve's research suggests that cows experience less stress, breed back sooner, and have higher solid components in their milk, which translates to a higher price for their milk. According to climate forecasts specific to Penobscot County, Maine, Clovercrest Farm may continue to see more shifts in weather patterns in the coming years. And ultimately, no single strategy can fully protect a farm from the stresses and shocks of climate change. Steve and Sonia will constantly have to search for what works for their farm as they discover what the new normal means for them. And the final project I'll be sharing with you tonight is one that is kind of just started. It's a project that I'll be working on this summer for the USDA Northeast Climate Hub, and it's a documentary film focused on soil health. It's going to be showing up-close personal stories of 3 working farms in the Mid-Atlantic region that are actively adapting to the impacts of climate change through their use of soil health practices. And in collaboration with these farms, I'll be working to capture their unique journey throughout the growing season. And the purpose of the film is really to help audiences better understand the important role soil health plays in a farm's economic and environmental well-being, and also telling the big agricultural side, or big ag's role in feeding our ever-increasing population under a changing climate. And with that, I would just like to thank the following sponsors for making the presentation here tonight possible. And I can take any questions.
Can you remind me what SDI stands for?
Subsurface drip irrigation.
And so how easy or difficult was it to get farmers on board to use that?
It wasn't my job to get farmers on board with that system. That was something that Will at Sester Lake Farms was actively doing to create a more efficient watering system because it controls weeds better, so he doesn't have to spray as much. He uses less water because it's targeted to root zones, and so different states might have different laws about water use rights. And for Sester Lake Farms, they don't have access to a lot of public water, and they kind of have created their own ponds. So, with more drought, they have to rely on less water.
What sort of crops would that be good for? This doesn't seem like big ag would use that, corn, soybeans, etc. Would there be more vegetable growers?
There would probably be more your vegetable growers. The 360 tour with the University of Delaware is looking at SDI in terms of big ag, big field production. But in terms of scale, I think it would be harder to scale for sure. But if a farm is concerned about drought and water use efficiency, that might be an investment they want to make when they look at, if they're thinking about their farm in the future. In the back, I guess?
I was just going to say, if you're interested in this kind of irrigation, you might want to look at the Central Valley of California. There are square miles of almond groves that are all underground irrigation. So because of their droughts and their issues with water, their farmers have invested millions of dollars in saving their groves by using underground irrigation.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's great. I mean, it makes sense because California's kind of been forced into a lot more
Yeah,
serious
Central
drought
Valley
conditions
has
than
changed
most in the
considerably
country.
because of the climate changes.
I think this gentleman first.
I'd like to know the history of climate hubs from 2015-16, let's say, to 2017-18. Did they stay the same after the change in administration?
Yes.
Everything stayed the same and
Yes.
it wasn't one of the targets?
No, we stayed the same. I'm trying to think of the timing. So with administration change, I mean, I think some of us were kind of a little wary of what would happen in terms of our initiative. But really our mission is about helping farmers adapt to climate variability. And farmers, forest landowners, people on the ground know that there's changes. And right after the administration change, USDA actually upgraded their website or had a new website rolled out for them. It's actually a really nice website now. And right on it, they have climate solutions right at the top, and that's where you kind of navigate over to the hubs if you want it as well. So USDA is pretty upfront about saying climate change is happening, it's a problem, let's adapt.
And the other question is, you talked about the sugar maple being one that was in the mixed category in the middle. Both in Vermont and the Northeast and in Wisconsin here, it's a major source of
Yep.
maple syrup, of course. How have farmers or people that collect sap from maple syrup and make maple syrup, how have they been affected in recent years?
I'm not sure I can maybe answer that because I haven't necessarily worked with a lot of sugar maple farmers.
Yeah.
You know, but when you think about kind of we're having milder winters, we're not getting as cold, our minimum cold temperatures are not as cold as they used to be. So winters are milder. So trees, from my limited knowledge about orchards and trees, trees really need to harden up kind of in the late fall to survive the winter, and the same goes for sugar maples. And so when you have these erratic thaws and warm days in the winter that shouldn't be that warm, that's I think hurting the trees overall versus that slow, gradual warm into spring.
Okay.
National Public Radio has covered that topic
Perfect.
for the last couple, 2 or 3 years about sugar bushes and businesses. And the price of maple syrup has gone up considerably because of that, because it's boomer bust. Some years they can't employ half the number of people who are running tubes to the trees because they're just not getting the sap. And then when you get the right winters and the right spring conditions, where you get the 40-20s, 40 during the day and 20 at night, but we're getting such warm springs earlier and extending longer that the sap running period is much shorter. So it's making a difference.
Yeah, exactly what he said.
Can you tell me where I find more information on integrating strips of native prairie vegetation and row crops? Would that be on your website?
That was actually a slide that I pulled from the National Climate Assessment, specifically from the Midwest chapter. So that slide actually gives a little more information about, I don't want to butcher because I forget what university is doing that research, but if you go to that slide from the National Climate Assessment, the Midwest chapter, check out their slide deck there.
Okay,
That's going to, you'll find that slide and it'll tell you what university is doing that research.
thank you.
There are so many great ideas here. How is this shared, like across the U.S. or worldwide?
Well, that's why we have 10 climate hubs. All our regions are doing a lot of diverse projects and working with a lot of diverse stakeholders and groups. So we work with Extension and people on the ground to kind of slowly get information out. And we use different websites and tools to be tools for farmers to make decisions. I'm not sure if that really answered your question, really, but
Well, I was just thinking of farmers who may or may not know some of this. I just didn't know how to get this dispersed.
yeah, I mean, we go to events, we hold conferences, we hold workshops. We're very, at least in the Northeast, we're very integrated with our university land grants and extension. And I know, for example, the Northern Forest Climate Hub works a lot with different nonprofits and private organizations on different kind of forest projects happening on the land. So I think word of mouth gets around really pretty well, but we're still young. We're only 5 years old, so it's fair. A lot of people don't know who we are, and that's okay. And we'll learn about it hopefully soon.
In partial answer to that question, the local farmer-led groups are leading the charge to that. And my buddy John Aaron isn't here tonight, but he's with the farmers of Mill Creek Watershed, and he's been really teaching, preaching those practices that you mentioned. Starting with the cover crops and the no-till, the cropping of just lightly scraping the surface, not deep tilling, and he can talk. Pardon?
Minimum till?
Pardon?
Like minimum tillage?
Right. And he can talk about some of the advantages, access to fields and things like that during wet weather, just due to the crops there. But the one thing he showed up there that I got a kick out of was using the prairies as your rain control strips, your grass waterways, because that's something I've been joking with him about, is getting him to, perimeter his fields with prairie, because and this is where I'd be interested in Dan's question too about more information on that. He said it's not just the pollinators that live in the prairie that can help the plants, but they have such a diverse insect population that they can help control slugs is his pet issue. And it seems like there are wasps that are native to prairies that can get slugs.
Yeah, to piggyback on what you just said, and kind of correct myself too, I mean, a lot of what we try and do in terms of information we share, farmers are already doing it. They already know a lot of these practices, which is why kind of half my presentation tonight was really sharing stories about what farms are doing, and trying to highlight these forward-thinking farms, so that farmers may be like, oh, I don't know, or like it's sharing those stories to get people on the wagon, and then in thinking about kind of integrating these different flowers or prairie crops. As an aside, the University of New Hampshire, I talked with a student researcher there a couple years back who has a research project looking at integrating different pollinator crops into Brussels sprouts to kind of help attract the pollinators and insects that would actually kind of attack aphids, because that's a really big issue in Brussels sprouts.
John would be here tonight, but he's giving a presentation right now in another part of the county. Otherwise, he'd have come.
That's okay.
He's a real leader in the Midwest, and is doing the stuff you're talking about.
That's awesome.
And you need to find people like him in each region.
You do.
And get them going. Yeah, he's my friend. This guy I introduced. He's working with us.
I just came across the term information architect, a new profession of communicating complex information in simple and clear terms. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, but more so in terms of building websites.
In terms of what?
Building websites.
Oh, building websites, okay.
Was there anything like?
No, just that you communicated well tonight, so I would consider you
thank you.
Information architect.
I'll add it to my resume.
Pure certification.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time.